When I read this letter from a subscriber, I had to stop halfway through and take a deep breath. This one is not just shocking, it's haunting. You're about to hear a story that starts with a simple inheritance and ends with a discovery that could change everything the writer thought she knew about her family. She wrote to me saying she had always adored her grandmother. Growing up, the old woman's house felt like a warm blanket on a winter night, safe, welcoming, full of the smell of baked pies and lavender soap. When her grandmother passed away, she was devastated, but the will left her with something unexpected. Ownership of the house itself, at first. It felt like a blessing. She thought she'd simply move in, make a few changes, and carry on the family legacy. But as you'll hear, sometimes blessings come with shadows hidden deep inside them. The first day she stepped inside as the new owner, something about the air felt heavier. The curtains were still drawn exactly how her grandmother had left them. The old grandfather clock ticked in the hallway, its sound echoing louder than she remembered. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts, and every creak of the floorboards seemed to whisper her name. While she unpacked her things, she noticed an odd section of the upstairs hallway. The wallpaper pattern shifted just slightly, and there was a faint outline, like the shape of a door that had been sealed shut for years. Her grandmother had never mentioned anything about a hidden room, and she'd played in that hallway countless times as a child. The idea that something had been there all along, watching, sent chills crawling up her spine. She told herself it was probably nothing. Maybe just poor construction or old plaster shifting with time. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was behind that wall wasn't meant to be found. Still, the more she tried to ignore it, the more her eyes kept drifting back to that faint outline. And that's when she decided she would find a way to open it, no matter what. The next morning, she went to the local hardware store and bought a small toolkit hammer, chisel, and a flashlight, just in case. She told herself it was just a bit of home improvement, but in truth, her heart was pounding the entire drive back. She couldn't stop wondering what her grandmother had kept hidden all these years. When she returned, sunlight was spilling into the hallway through the dusty curtains, casting sharp lines across the wall where that strange outline was. She ran her fingers along the wallpaper again. It was smoother in some spots, brittle in others, like it had been reinforced or patched over. Her first tap with the hammer made a dull thud, nothing like the hollow sound of a normal wall. That alone told her something was definitely there. She tapped again, harder this time, and a faint metallic clink echoed from inside. That noise didn't belong in a wooden wall. Her stomach twisted. Maybe it wasn't just a room, maybe it was a safe or some kind of hidden compartment. She remembered her grandmother's stories about the war, about how certain things were never meant to be found by the wrong hands. Piece by piece, she chipped away the plaster until finally the edge of a rusted metal door began to emerge. It wasn't large enough to be a normal door, more like an entrance to a narrow storage space. At the center was a keyhole, completely covered in dust. She froze. Her grandmother had left her the house, but had she also left the key? And if she hadn't, did she really want this door to be opened? The key question rattled in her mind, but curiosity was already pulling her forward. She didn't know it yet, but opening that door would be the one decision that would change everything she thought she knew about her family and herself. She decided to search every corner of the house, starting with her grandmother's bedroom. The air in there still carried the faint scent of lavender and old books, a smell that instantly brought back childhood memories. She opened the knitstand. Drawer inside were neatly folded handkerchiefs, a rosary, and an old pocket watch, but no key dot moving to the wardrobe. She pushed aside rows of faded dresses, some still with the faint shimmer of sequins from dances decades ago. Her fingers brushed the back panel, and she noticed a slight gap where the wood didn't quite meet. Heart racing, she pulled it forward, revealing a small velvet pouch tied with a ribbon. Inside the pouch was a single brass key, tarnished with age, but clearly still strong. It had intricate carvings, tiny flowers spiraling toward the handle. She ran her thumb over the patterns, feeling a strange shiver. This wasn't just a key. It was a piece of history. As she stood holding it, she noticed something else in the wardrobe, a faded photograph tucked between the boards. In the photo, her grandmother was standing in the same hallway where the hidden door was, but there was a man beside her that she didn't recognize. His eyes seemed to follow her, even through the decades-old picture. She flipped the photo over. Written in elegant handwriting were the words, "For when the time comes." That was it. No date, no explanation. Clutching the key in one hand and the photograph in the other, she realized she had no choice. She had to know what was behind that door, whether it was treasure, a secret, or something that should have stayed buried. She took a deep breath, the weight of both curiosity and dread pressing against her chest, and walked back toward the hallway. The truth was waiting, and it might not be the truth she wanted. She crouched in front of the metal door, the key trembling in her hand. The carved flowers glinted faintly in the dim hallway light, as if mocking her hesitation. For a moment, she wondered if she should stop, walk away, and never think about it again. But the photograph's strange inscription burned in her mind. The key slid into the lock more smoothly than she expected, almost as if it had been oiled recently. That realization made her stomach knot. Who had been here? Who had kept this mechanism ready? With a slow turn, she felt the tumblers click into place, each one echoing like a small gunshot in the silence. When the door creaked open, a rush of cool, stale air spilled out, carrying with it a scent of dust, metal, and something faintly metallic. The narrow passage beyond was barely lit by a single hanging bulb swaying gently, though she felt no breeze. The walls inside were lined with shelves, each crammed with boxes, binders, and jars filled with unidentifiable objects. Some boxes were labeled with names, none of which she recognized, but one jar in particular caught her attention. Inside was a lock of hair tied with a red ribbon, and on the glass was a small label. Eleanor Dot. As her eyes adjusted, she realized there was more than just storage. At the far end of the room was a large wooden trunk, the kind you'd see in old ship voyages. Its corners were reinforced with iron, and a heavy padlock secured it shut. Her fingers itched to open it, but she hesitated again. The atmosphere and the room was oppressive, as though the very air was warning her not to dig deeper. Yet the compulsion to know was stronger. With one more deep breath, she stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under her weight, and approached the trunk. Whatever was inside had been hidden for decades, and she was about to be the first to see it. She knelt before the trunk, the padlock cold and heavy in her hands. There was no key in sight, but she noticed the hinge pins were loose, almost as if someone had opened it recently and didn't bother to fix it properly. She pried one pin free with a screwdriver she found on a nearby shelf. Her pulse quickening, with a sharp metallic snap, the padlock fell to the floor. The sound echoed unnaturally, like it carried further than it should have, bouncing off walls that felt too close. She lifted the lid slowly, the hinges screaming in protest. Inside, instead of the piles of old clothes or trinkets she expected, there was a stack of yellowed envelopes, dozens of them, each addressed to her mother, but with a return address she didn't recognize. The handwriting was sharp, almost aggressive, and every envelope had not delivered, scrawled across it in red ink. Beneath the letters was a small wooden box. She opened it and froze. Inside lay a set of photographs, each depicting the same man tall, dark-haired, with a familiar jawline, standing next to women who looked eerily similar to her. In some photos, the women were smiling. In others, they looked terrified. Her stomach churned when she realized that one of the women in the photographs wasn't just similar to her, it was her. But the picture was dated 10 years before she was even born, and there, tucked beneath the last photograph, was a birth certificate. Her birth certificate, only the parents' names were different, and the mother's name wasn't her mother's at all. Her hands trembled so badly she almost dropped the paper. The name in the mother field was Elena Marquez. She had never heard of this woman in her life. The father's name was scribbled in fading ink Michael Gray, and though the surname was different, something about it clawed at her memory. She tried to steady her breathing, scanning the dates again. If the certificate was real, it meant her mother wasn't her mother. But then, who had been raising her all these years? And why pretend? One of the envelopes caught her eye. It wasn't sealed like the others. She slid the letter out and unfolded the brittle paper. The words inside were short, frantic, and full of urgency. They will come for her when the time is right. Keep her away from the house on Redwater Lane. Do not let her see the photograph. Her pulse roared in her ears. What house? What photograph? She remembered the street name, Redwater Lane, from a half-forgotten conversation years ago, when her mother had strictly told her never to go there. At the time, she thought it was just a run-down part of town. Tucked into the envelope was a faded Polaroid. Her chest tightened as she recognized the man from the other photos. this time standing in front of a crumbling two-story house, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. The baby's blanket was the same floral pattern she'd seen in her own baby pictures. She stumbled backward, knocking the wooden box to the floor, its contents spilling out. But what caught her attention wasn't the noise. It was the faint sound of a car door slamming outside. She froze, clutching the Polaroid like it might dissolve in her hands. Peeking through the dusty lace curtains, she spotted a dark sedan idling at the curb. The windows were tinted, and the engine's low rumble made her skin crawl. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat despite the mild weather. His face was partially hidden by the brim of his hat, but she caught a glimpse of piercing eyes scanning the house like he already knew she was inside. Panic surged. She quickly swept the scattered papers and photographs back into the wooden box, her fingers fumbling over the brittle edges. Somewhere in her gut, she knew this stranger was connected to the letter's warning. The man approached the front steps, his slow, deliberate movements making her feel trapped. She could almost hear her mother's voice from years ago. If anyone comes asking about your past, you run. The doorbell rang a single sharp chime that echoed through the empty house. Then came a knock. Not frantic, but steady, like a metronome keeping time with her heartbeat. She stepped backward, holding her breath, but then the man's voice came. Through the door, calm and chilling. I know who you are, and I know what she's been hiding from you. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but something in the man's voice pulled her closer to the door. It wasn't threatening, it was certain, like he wasn't here to ask questions, but to confirm them. What do you want? She called, forcing her tone to sound steadier than she felt. I want to tell you the truth your mother never could, he replied, his voice low enough that she had to press her ear to the wood to catch every word. But once I do, you can't unhear it. The phrase made her stomach twist. The box in her arms felt heavier, like it was anchoring her to the floor. She thought of her fiancé waiting at home, of how he'd reacted when he first saw that photo. The same reaction she'd had reading the letter. Why now? She asked. If you know something, why not years ago? There was a pause, a long, deliberate one before he answered, because the person who kept you hidden is gone, and I'm the only one left who can protect you from what's coming. A gust of wind rattled the old windows, and in the distance she thought she heard the faint hum of another engine approaching. Her hand hesitated on the lock. Part of her screamed to open the door, demand answers face to face. Another part feared that once she did, she'd step into a reality she could never step back from, through the crack between curtain and window. She saw him, mid-40s, tall, wearing a weathered leather jacket, his eyes sharp but familiar, too familiar. She couldn't place where she'd seen them before, but they stirred something deep in her memory. You have 5 minutes before they get here, he said, glancing over his shoulder at the distant hum that was growing. Louder. If you let them arrive first, they'll spin a story you'll believe, and you'll never know the truth. Her voice trembled as she asked, Who's coming? Your fiancé. And your brother, he said, his tone cold. Only he's not really your brother. And your fiancé knows exactly why. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Her grip on the box tightened until her knuckles went white, and then he added, almost as an afterthought, the man you're marrying has been lying about who you are since the day you met. Her knees nearly gave out. She stumbled back, pressing herself against the wall, eyes locked on the stranger at her door. What do you mean, lying about who I am? She whispered, though every word scraped her throat like glass. The man stepped forward, his voice low but urgent. You weren't supposed to exist. Years ago, your mother had a child, but not with the man you thought was your father. That child was hidden, given another identity. That child is you. She shook her head violently. No, my father raised me. I have baby pictures, family memories. Pictures can be faked, memories can be arranged, he said, his gaze steady. Your fiancé knows the truth because he's been working for the man who wanted you gone from the start. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made her flinch. She peeked through the blinds, her fiancé's silver SUV, and beside him, a face she'd seen countless times at family gatherings. Her so-called brother, the man at the door, gave her one last warning. If you open that door for them, you'll lose your chance to know who you really are. Her pulse hammered in her ears as her hand froze on the doorknob, the air thick with the weight of a decision she could never undo. She backed away from the door, her breathing shallow, every instinct screaming at her to run. The stranger's words coiled in her mind like a venom she couldn't spit out. Given another identity, not supposed to exist, her fiancé's voice rang out from outside. "Babe, open up. We need to talk." The tone was too smooth, too rehearsed. Her so-called brother chimed in. "It's important. You'll want to hear this." She remembered the night 2 weeks ago when she'd woken at 3 a.m. to find her fiancé on the phone, whispering about papers and the right timing. When she confronted him, he'd brushed it off as work. Now the memory burned like a flare in the dark. The stranger moved closer, his voice urgent. "They'll twist the truth before you can get it. I have proof, but you have to trust me. Your real father is alive, and he's been looking for you for years." The Sue's engine shut off, and the sound of footsteps on the porch grew louder. She could hear the rattle of keys. Her fiancé had one for emergencies. The man at her side grabbed her wrist. "If we leave now, I can take you to him. If you stay, they'll make sure you never find him." Her heart felt like it was being torn in two, one side tethered to the life she thought she knew, the other pulled toward a truth that could destroy it all. The key scraped in the lock, the sound slicing through the air like a blade. She froze, her pulse pounding in her ears. The stranger's grip on her wrist tightened, urging her toward the back door dot through the frosted glass. She saw the shadow of her fiancé step inside, his posture calm, almost calculated. Behind him, her brother lingered, eyes darting like a man expecting trouble. "Where is she?" Her fiancé's voice was cool, too controlled for the situation. It was as if he already knew what she'd heard and was prepared to clean up the mess. The stranger leaned close to her ear. "That man you're about to face isn't who you think he is. And neither is your mother." His words were a match to a fuse. Sparking dread deep in her gut dot, she thought of her mother's odd silences, the way she'd always changed the subject whenever questions about her birth came up. There had been moments, subtle, fleeting, when her mother's eyes looked at her with something closer to pity than love. Her fiancé took a step forward, his gaze locked on her like a predator sizing up prey. "We need to go now. Don't listen to him. He's dangerous." The stranger pulled something from his jacket, a worn envelope, yellowed with age, and pressed it into her palm. "Everything you need to know is in here. But once you read it, there's no going back." She glanced between the two men, feeling the walls of her reality close in. Every truth she thought she had beginning to crack. Her fingers trembled as she tore open the envelope, her fiancé's voice cutting through the air. "Don't you dare read that. It's all lies." His tone was sharp, but underneath, she could hear a crack of panic dot inside. There was a single black and white photograph. At first, it looked harmless, a picture of a young woman holding a baby in a small hospital room. But as her eyes adjusted, she felt the blood drain from her face. The woman in the photo wasn't her mother. It was the stranger's wife, and the baby in her arms was her. Same birthmark on the temple, same eyes. The date scribbled in the corner matched the day she thought she'd been born. Her mind raced. If this was true, her entire life had been built on a lie. Her mother wasn't her mother. Her fiancé wasn't who she thought, and the stranger was her real father. "I told you, she's mine," the stranger said, his voice breaking. "They stole you from me." Her fiancé stepped closer, his face pale, but his eyes burning. "She's not going anywhere. She knows too much now." In that instant, she realized this wasn't about love or even family. It was about control. And both men would do anything to keep her in their version of the truth. The sound of sirens grew louder outside, and for the first time, she wondered if she'd survive the night. The sirens wailed closer, flashing red and blue light through the living room curtains. Her heart pounded as both men turned toward the door, one with fear, the other with rage. She clutched the photograph, holding it like a lifeline, her knuckles white. Her fiancé stepped forward, grabbing her wrist. "Give it to me now," he demanded, his grip tightening. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid, she was furious. The front door burst open, and officers stormed inside, weapons drawn. "Step away from her," one shouted. The stranger lifted his hand slowly, but her fiancé hesitated, his jaw clenching as if deciding whether to run or fight. She spoke before anyone else could. "That man," she pointed at the stranger, "is my real father. And this one," her eyes burned into her fiancé, "has been lying to me for years, keeping me from the truth." The officers moved in, separating them. Her fiancé was handcuffed, still shouting that she didn't understand, that there was more to the story. But she didn't want to hear it anymore. Outside, the cold air hit her face as she clung to the photograph. Her real father stood beside her, tears glistening in his eyes. "We have a lot to talk about," he said softly. For the first time in her life, she didn't know who she truly was, but she knew one thing for certain: she would never let anyone write her story again. The following weeks were a blur of police statements, DNA tests, and late-night conversations with the man she had just met, but who shared her eyes, her smile, and even her stubborn way of standing. The results confirmed what her heart already knew: he was her father. Her mother's absence in all of it was deafening. She refused to answer calls or texts, and when they finally met face to face, the woman offered no apology, only a cold, "It was better this way." That sentence echoed in her head for nights. Better for who? Her father explained the truth piece by piece: how her mother had run away with her when she was a baby, cutting him out of her life entirely. He had searched for years until he was told she and the baby had died in an accident. The lie had kept them apart for decades. As for her fiancé, the betrayal cut deepest. He had been the bridge between her mother's world and her own, carrying the secret like a guard at the gate. She still didn't know why he agreed to hide it, whether it was loyalty, fear, or his own selfish motive. When she finally packed her things and left the apartment, she didn't cry. She felt light, almost free. The world outside was still the same, but she wasn't. She had reclaimed her story, her truth, and her name. Standing beside her father, she looked at the horizon and realized something powerful. Sometimes family isn't about who raises you, but who fights for you when the world tries to erase you. And now, she was ready to fight too.